When my parents told me we were moving into the old Victorian house at the far edge of town, I didn't know what to expect, only that it stood taller and darker than any home we'd ever lived in before, with its pointed roof stabbing the sky and its windows staring out like heavy-lidded eyes, watching everything in silence, and though they kept saying it was a new beginning, a chance for us to start over. I felt a weight in my chest the moment I saw it, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for us to cross its threshold, and once we did, something about us would change forever. The day we arrived, the air was thick and damp, carrying the smell of wet earth, and the creak of the iron gate seemed to echo louder than it should have, as though the house itself was welcoming us or warning us. I couldn't tell which. My little sister Emma clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly, hiding half her face behind its worn ears, and whispered to me that the house didn't look friendly, that its windows looked like frowning eyes, and though I laughed it off, saying she was just being dramatic, I secretly agreed. My parents, however, were blind to it all, my mother beaming with excitement as she carried boxes inside, talking about how much character the house had, how much history, while my father muttered about all the work it would take to fix the place up, but I could tell even he was curious, glancing up at the tall roof line, at the single dark window just beneath the peak where the attic must be, a window so dust-covered it was nearly opaque, though I thought I saw something shift behind it, a shadow retreating as we stepped through the front door. Inside, the house smelled of wood and dust, the kind of smell that clings to your skin, and every step made the floorboards groan like they were waking from a long sleep. The ceilings were high, the wallpaper faded and peeling, and cobwebs clung to the corners, trembling slightly as though disturbed by our presence. My mother walked from room to room with her hands clasped together, already planning how to decorate, while my father tested the banisters and doors, his voice booming about repairs, but I couldn't stop staring at the staircase that curled up to the second floor. And above it, the square outline of the attic door cut into the ceiling of the hallway. It was just wood and hinges, nothing remarkable, but something about it tugged at me, like a secret waiting to be told, and the longer I stared, the more I thought I heard faint movement, like something shifting just beyond the door, and I quickly looked away, telling myself it was only my imagination. That night, after a long day of unpacking, I lay in my new bedroom staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar groans of the house. Emma was asleep in the room next to mine, though I could hear her faint snores through the wall, and downstairs my parents were still talking quietly, their voices drifting upward. But in between the creaks and murmurs, I caught another sound, softer, quicker, like the patter of small feet running above me, across the attic floor, light and fast, stopping, starting again, circling, and for a moment I thought Emma had gotten up. But the sound came from directly above, and her room wasn't above mine, it was beside it. I held my breath, waiting for it to stop, but then faintly I heard something else, something that made my skin prickle, a laugh, high-pitched, short, almost playful but muffled, like it came from behind thick walls or from a mouth that hadn't laughed in years. I bolted upright in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding, but the sound was gone, swallowed by the silence, and I told myself it was just the house settling, the wood creaking under its own weight, though deep down I knew wood didn't laugh. The next morning, the memory of the sound lingered, heavy in my chest, but I didn't say anything. My parents were already stressed with the move, and Emma was excitedly showing off how she'd decorated her room with her toys. Still, as I walked down the hallway, my eyes flicked upward again to the attic door, and I saw something that made me stop. The thin layer of dust on the floor beneath it was disturbed, faint trails like someone had been pacing back and forth up there, and though I crouched down to look closer, my father's voice boomed from the kitchen, calling me to help, and I quickly brushed the thought aside, though the unease remained. Later that evening, as we all sat in the living room surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, Emma suddenly asked, "Who was playing upstairs last night?" Her voice was casual, innocent, but it made me stiffen, and when my mother asked what she meant, Emma said she heard footsteps above her ceiling, running back and forth, and then she heard someone giggle, like a kid, but when she called out, no one answered. My father chuckled, shaking his head, saying old houses always made strange noises, that she would get used to it, but I saw the way my mother's smile faltered, just slightly before she quickly recovered, and I wondered if she had heard it too. That night, the sounds returned, louder this time, and I lay frozen in my bed, staring at the ceiling while the faint patter of feet scurried back and forth above me. Then came the whisper, soft and broken, slipping through the cracks in the wood. My name stretched thin like a sigh. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the blanket tightly, trying to will it away, but the whisper came again, closer, clearer. And this time it wasn't just my name, it was Emma's too, spoken like a secret, like an invitation. I almost ran to her room, but I was too afraid, too rooted in place, and when morning came I convinced myself it was only a dream, even though my gut told me otherwise. But when Emma came to me pale-faced, clutching her rabbit to her chest, and said she heard someone in the attic calling to her, I knew we were both caught in something real, something waiting in the shadows above our heads, and I realized with a chill that whatever lived in this house had noticed us, and it wasn't planning to let us go so easily. The second morning in the house should have been ordinary, filled with the smell of my mother's coffee and the sound of my father grumbling about unpacking, but instead it felt heavy, like the house itself had decided to smother us under its silence. Emma hardly spoke at breakfast, her eyes glued to the ceiling as though she expected to hear something again. My father tried to make jokes, telling her that old pipes and old wood made all kinds of funny sounds, that she'd get used to it, but I could tell he didn't fully believe his own words. He avoided looking at the attic door when he walked down the hall, and I wondered if maybe he too had heard something, but just refused to admit it. Parents always thought pretending solved things, but I knew some things grew stronger when ignored. After breakfast, my mother sent me to the upstairs hallway to bring down a box she left near the attic door. I didn't want to go, but I didn't argue either, because arguing would mean admitting what I was afraid of, and I didn't want to give it power. The hallway was dim, the single bulb above flickering faintly, and the air felt colder near the ceiling, as though the attic door was leaking a chill into the house. I bent to grab the box, but then I froze. The attic door above me shuddered, not loudly, just the faintest shift, as though something had brushed against it from the inside. Dust rained down in a tiny sprinkle, speckling the top of my hair, and I dropped the box instantly, stumbling backward, staring up at the square outline. For a long moment, nothing happened, but the silence was worse than the movement. My breathing sounded too loud, echoing off the walls, and I whispered to myself, "It's nothing. It's nothing," but the moment I turned to leave, I heard it. 3 slow knocks. From the other side of the attic door. I didn't scream. My voice caught in my throat, and instead I ran, nearly tripping down the stairs as I carried the box like a shield. My mother looked up in surprise, asking why I was out of breath, but I muttered something about the stairs and hurried past her. I didn't tell her about the knocks. I didn't tell anyone. Part of me thought if I didn't speak it out loud, it would stay locked behind that door, but deep down I knew it was already bleeding into the rest of the house. That night I woke up to Emma shaking me. Her eyes were wide, wet with tears, and she whispered, "It's calling again." My stomach twisted, and I asked what she meant. She pointed up at the ceiling, her little finger trembling. "The child. It wants us to come play." Her voice cracked on the last word, and before I could respond, the sound reached me too. A faint tapping, like tiny fingers drumming on wood coming from above. Then a giggle, sharp and quick, skittering across the boards. Emma clutched my arm tighter. We both sat frozen, listening as the footsteps began again, running in circles above our heads, faster and faster, until suddenly they stopped. The silence was worse. It pressed down on us, suffocating, until a single word broke it, whispered in a voice too close, too clear. "Emma." She buried her face in my shoulder, sobbing, and I felt cold all over, because I knew then it wasn't just me. It wasn't just her, it was something real, something that had learned our names. The following day, while my parents worked on unpacking, I decided to test myself, to see if maybe fear was just twisting ordinary sounds into monsters. I dragged a chair beneath the attic door and climbed up just high enough to reach the handle. My hand trembled as I pressed it against the cold metal latch, half expecting it to resist, but to my shock it moved easily, like it hadn't been sealed at all. I didn't open it, though. I froze because the moment I touched it, a sound came from the other side. A quiet giggle, so. The first few nights had already been hard, but what came next was worse, far worse. It wasn't just creaks or the shuffle of footsteps anymore. It was laughter. Real laughter. High, breathless, and broken in a way that made the skin on my arms tighten like I'd stepped into cold water. The sound began faint, almost playful, as though a child were hiding just out of reach, waiting to be found in a game of hide and seek. But then it would stretch, lingering too long, echoing through the ceiling boards until it sounded less like joy and more like something mocking us. like it was laughing at us for daring to live here. Emma heard it first that night. She shook me awake. Her little hand pressed tightly over my mouth so I wouldn't speak too loudly. "Listen," she whispered, her voice trembling. I lay still, straining my ears, and there it was. The giggle, light and sharp, followed by the quick scurry of footsteps overhead. Back and forth, like something or someone was running across the attic floor. My heart slammed in my chest, but I forced myself to sit up, staring at the ceiling where faint shadows seemed to move with every creak. "Do you hear it?" Emma whispered again. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We both stayed frozen, listening. The room wrapped in darkness except for the faint glow of the moonlight spilling through the curtains. The laughter rose again, louder now, circling above us as though it knew exactly where we were. I grabbed Emma's hand, squeezing it tightly, and we huddled together on the bed. The sound stopped suddenly, replaced by silence so thick it pressed against my ears. For a moment I thought it was over, but then, just above my head, I heard it. 3 slow knocks, Emma whimpered, pressing closer to me. "It knows where we are," she whispered. I wanted to tell her it was just the house, just wood shifting, but I couldn't bring myself to lie. Not when the knocks were so deliberate, so human. Not when I swore I heard a whisper slip through the boards after them. Faint, but unmistakable. A single word. My name. Sleep never came after that. We lay awake until the pale light of dawn bled through the curtains, too afraid to move, too afraid to breathe. When morning finally arrived, Emma refused to leave my side. She followed me down the creaking stairs, her rabbit clutched tightly against her chest, her eyes darting to the ceiling every time it groaned. My parents noticed, of course. They asked why we looked so tired, why Emma seemed pale and jumpy, but when I opened my mouth to explain, the words stuck. What could I say? That there was a child living in our attic, a child that laughed in the dark and whispered our names? They'd never believe it. They'd tell me it was nightmares, stress from moving, an overactive imagination. So I swallowed the truth, letting it burn my throat, and told them nothing, but the house knew. That night, the footsteps came again, heavier this time, pounding against the ceiling as though whoever was up there was growing restless. The laughter returned too, sharper now, echoing down the hallway outside our rooms. I pressed my pillow over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound cut through the fabric, worming its way into my head. Emma crawled into bed with me, her body trembling as the giggles danced around us. "I don't like it here," she whispered. "I don't either," I admitted. The sound grew louder, spreading through the walls, and for a moment it almost seemed like there were more than one. Several voices, all laughing together, overlapping, weaving into a chorus of something cruel and endless. I felt my stomach twist, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just noise. It was communication. It was celebration. Something up there was happy we were listening. Suddenly, there was a crash from the attic above, as though something heavy had been thrown across the floor. Dust sifted down through the cracks in the ceiling. Emma yelped, and I instinctively held her closer, staring wide-eyed at the ceiling as silence returned. The laughter stopped. The footsteps stopped. The whole house seemed to hold its breath. Then came the whisper, low drawn out, curling into the air like smoke. "Play with me." Emma let out a sob, muffled against my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It wasn't until the sound finally faded, melting into the distant groan of the house settling, that I dared to breathe again. By morning, my eyes ached from lack of sleep, and Emma looked as though she'd aged years in a single night. My parents grew frustrated with us, insisting we couldn't keep waking each other up, that we needed rest. My father suggested putting a lock on the attic door, as though that would solve anything, but the idea of sealing it tighter only made my skin crawl. The laughter didn't need the door. It slipped through the walls, the floor, the air itself. I tried to keep Emma busy during the day, taking her out into the overgrown garden behind the house. The sunlight felt safer, but even then I caught her staring at the upper windows. Once she whispered to me that she saw a face in the glass, a pale, thin face with hollow eyes that vanished the moment I turned to look. I told her it was her imagination, but the truth was I didn't look for long. I was too afraid of what I might see. That night, the laughter returned stronger than ever. It didn't just stay above us, it moved. It slipped down into the hallway, echoing against the walls, bouncing closer and closer to our bedroom door. Emma and I huddled under the blanket, hearts pounding, listening as the doorknob rattled softly, turning just a fraction before stopping. Then came the whisper again, this time clearer than before. "Emma, come out." Her grip on me was so tight it hurt, but I didn't dare move. I shut my eyes, praying the door wouldn't open, praying the voice would lose interest. Minutes stretched into hours, and finally the sound faded. But I knew it wasn't gone. It was waiting. By the fourth night, exhaustion weighed heavier than fear, though fear never truly left. It clung to us, lingering in every corner of the house like a damp chill that no fire could warm away. Emma and I hadn't slept properly since the whispers began, and it showed in her pale face, the shadows under her eyes, and the way she clutched her rabbit like it was the only thing anchoring her to safety. But what terrified me most was how the sounds were no longer confined to the attic at night. They were spreading, bleeding into the daylight, creeping into hours where sunlight should have kept them at bay. It began at breakfast. My parents were at the table, sipping coffee, talking about unpacking more boxes when I heard it. The faintest giggle drifting down from the ceiling above us. My spoon froze midway to my mouth. I looked at Emma, and she was already staring back, wide-eyed. She'd heard it too. Did you? I started, but she shook her head quickly, warning me not to speak. My parents didn't notice. They just went on with their conversation, oblivious to the laughter that threaded between us. Later that afternoon, while Emma and I played in the garden, the whispers returned. At first it was just a faint sound like the wind stirring through the weeds, but then the words sharpened, pressing into my ears. "Don't leave me." "Stay?" Emma froze mid-step. "You heard it too?" She whispered, her voice tight. I nodded, my stomach nodding. It wasn't just nighttime anymore. It wasn't just confined to one place. Whatever lived above us, it was growing stronger, braver, slipping further into our world. That evening, my father decided to finally check the attic. He'd grown tired of Emma's fear, tired of my pale face and the restless nights. "It's just mice," he insisted. "Maybe a raccoon or two. You'll see." He pulled the attic ladder down with a harsh snap, the hinges groaning, and began to climb up with a flashlight. My chest tightened. I wanted to scream at him not to go, to slam the door shut and never open it again. But I said nothing. I stood there gripping Emma's hand as my father disappeared into the shadows above. Minutes passed. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the faint shuffle of his steps. Then the beam of his flashlight flickered through the cracks in the ceiling. "Nothing here but dust," he called down. His voice sounded too loud, too forced, as if he was trying to convince himself more than us. But then I heard it, so soft, so faint I almost doubted it was real. A laugh. A child's laugh echoing directly above him. My father froze. His light swung wildly, beams cutting through dust-filled air. "Who's up here?" he barked. The laughter rose again, clearer this time, circling him the way it had circled us. Emma whimpered, burying her face into my side. My father cursed under his breath, stomping across the floorboards, his heavy steps making the whole ceiling groan. "Nothing," he snapped a moment later, his head appearing at the opening. Old wood. It echoes, but his eyes betrayed him. They were wide, darting, and his face had gone pale. He slammed the attic door shut harder than necessary and muttered something about calling pest control. That night the house felt angrier. The laughter began earlier, just after dusk, spilling down the hallway louder than before. It no longer sounded like one child, it sounded like several, overlapping, running, giggling, knocking on the walls. Emma covered her ears and rocked back and forth, whispering prayers under her breath. I tried to calm her, but my own hands shook as the voices called our names again and again, taunting, teasing. At one point the doorknob rattled violently, jerking back and forth as if someone on the other side was desperate to come in. Emma screamed and I lunged forward, holding the knob still with both hands, though I knew no child could have had that kind of strength. The rattling stopped only when the laughter did, fading into silence so sharp my ears rang with it. The following day, I had sworn to myself I would never open that attic door. Every night I heard the laughter, every whisper that slid down the walls, every creak above my head. Each one was a warning. But warnings only work for so long. Fear becomes unbearable when it mixes with curiosity, and sooner or later you want answers, even if those answers terrify you. That night, after the longest stretch yet of footsteps circling my room, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. Emma had finally fallen asleep beside me, her face pressed into her stuffed rabbit, tears drying on her cheeks. I didn't want her to see what I was about to do. If she begged me not to, I might stop, and I knew, God help me, I knew I wasn't going to stop this time. I crept into the hallway, my feet pressing into the cold wood floor. The house was quiet, too quiet as though it knew what I was about to do. Above me, the square outline of the attic door waited, a dark shadow in the ceiling. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my hands moved on their own, dragging the old wooden chair from the hallway table and placing it directly beneath the door. When I climbed onto it, I could feel the draft immediately, cold air leaking down from the edges of the hatch. I reached up, fingers brushing the thin string that dangled from the latch, and pulled. The sound was louder than I expected, a metallic click, a low creak, the hinges groaning as the attic door swung open just a few inches. Dust rained down, coating my hair, and the smell hit me immediately. Old wood, rot, and something sweet but sour, like fruit that had spoiled long ago. For a moment I just stood there, trembling, staring into the blackness above. Then slowly I pulled the door down all the way. The folding ladder groaned as it stretched toward me, each rung coated in dust. My throat felt dry, but my feet moved anyway, climbing the first rung, then the second, each creak of wood echoing through the silent hallway. By the time I reached the top, my hands were slick with sweat. I raised my head, peering into the attic, and my breath caught. The space was larger than I imagined. The ceiling sloped low, beams exposed, and the floor was covered in dust so thick it looked like snow. Boxes sat in piles, their cardboard eaten away by time, their labels faded. Cobwebs stretched across every corner, glinting faintly in the moonlight that seeped through the small circular attic window. And then I heard it. A giggle. High, sharp, and close. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand. The sound hadn't come from behind me, not from downstairs. It came from inside the attic. I forced myself to raise the light, its beam cutting across the dusty floor. For a moment, all I saw were boxes and shadows. Then the beam caught movement. In the far corner, just beyond the reach of the light, something shifted. A small figure crouched low, half hidden behind an old trunk. I swallowed hard, my body screaming at me to retreat, but my mind wouldn't let me. I raised the flashlight higher, the beam steadying just enough to reveal it. A child. At least it looked like one. Small, thin, with pale skin stretched too tightly across its frame. Its hair was stringy, matted, and hung in uneven clumps around its face. Its eyes caught the light for just a second, glinting like glass marbles, far too wide, far too bright. And then it smiled. That smile, it wasn't a child's smile. It was too sharp, too knowing. Its lips cracked at the corners as though it hadn't smiled in years, revealing teeth too small, too many. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. "Play with me," it whispered. The voice was exactly what I'd heard in the nights before, only louder now, clearer. It echoed through the attic, bouncing off the walls until it felt like the words were surrounding me. I staggered back a step, my foot hitting the ladder. The child moved then, crawling out from behind the trunk on all fours, its movements too quick, too jerky, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. Its smile never faltered, its wide eyes fixed on me. My flashlight flickered. For a second, the attic plunged into darkness, and in that second I swore I felt cold breath against my face. When the light came back, the child was closer, just a few feet away now, crouched low, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Stay," it whispered again, tilting its head further until I heard the faint crack of bone. "Don't leave me." I stumbled backward, nearly falling through the opening. My heart raced, my legs trembling, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The child's smile widened as though it could taste my fear. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. The beam of my flashlight swept the attic, but the corner where it had crouched was empty. Dust lay undisturbed. The shadows were still. Only the faint smell of rot lingered, heavy and suffocating. I scrambled down the ladder, slamming the attic door shut so hard the chair beneath me toppled over. My chest heaved with ragged breaths as I pressed my back against the wall, staring up at the ceiling. For several minutes I didn't move. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe, but then from above I heard it again. The laughter. Not faint, not distant, but loud, directly over my head. And this time, Emma heard it too. Her bedroom door creaked open, her small figure stepping into the hallway, rabbit dangling limply from her hand. Her eyes were wide, tears already brimming. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered. I couldn't answer. My throat locked shut, my mind replaying the smile, the voice, the figure crawling across the attic floor. I had seen it, and I knew without doubt that it had seen me too. I didn't sleep that night, not after what I had seen. Every time I closed my eyes, the image returned. The two wide eyes glinting in the dark, the smile stretched thin and sharp, the way it crawled toward me like something that had forgotten how to be human. Even with the attic door shut, even with the ladder folded back into the ceiling, I could still feel it up there. Waiting. Emma sat awake with me, her rabbit clutched so tightly I thought the seams might rip. She didn't ask me what I saw, she didn't need to. The look on my face told her everything. Instead, she whispered things I didn't want to hear, that the child had been calling her name again, that it whispered to her in the quiet moments when she thought she was alone, that sometimes she whispered back. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it hadn't been real. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe my mind had twisted shadows and dust into something monstrous. But Emma shattered that fragile denial when she asked, "Did it smile at you too?" The way she said it, soft but certain, told me she already knew the answer. From that day on, things changed. It wasn't just sounds anymore, it was sightings, glimpses, shadows darting in the corners of my vision. Once, as I brushed my teeth, I saw a small figure in the mirror standing in the hallway behind me, still and silent, watching. When I spun around, the hallway was empty. Another time, Emma screamed in the middle of the afternoon, pointing to the attic window from the garden. I looked up, and for the briefest second I saw it. The pale face pressed against the glass, smiling down at us. My parents grew more concerned. They couldn't ignore it anymore. Not after the heavy footsteps woke them in the night, not after my mother swore she heard giggling outside her bedroom door. They tried to blame each other, tried to reason it away, but the fear in their eyes betrayed them. They knew something was wrong. They just didn't want to admit what. One evening after dinner, I gathered the courage to tell them. I told them about the attic, about what I had seen. My father's face went pale, though he masked it quickly with anger. "You've been filling your sister's head with nonsense," he snapped. "This house is old, it creaks, it settles. That's all." But I saw the way his hands trembled as he gripped his glass. I saw the way he avoided looking at the ceiling. That night, the laughter returned louder than ever. It echoed through the walls, rattling picture frames, shaking the thin glass in the windows. Emma and I huddled together, whispering prayers, but the sound didn't stop. If anything, it grew closer, circling our bed, brushing past our ears. At one point, I felt something cold graze my hand beneath the blanket, small fingers, impossibly cold. I yanked my hand back with a strangled cry, and the laughter exploded sharp and shrill, filling the room with a terrible glee. Then it stopped. The silence was almost worse. My heart pounded in my chest, the ringing in my ears deafening. Slowly, I lifted my head, peering over the blanket, and froze. It was there. The child stood at the foot of the bed, its body too thin, its skin pale as wax. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, catching the moonlight, and that same terrible smile stretched across its face. It didn't move. It just stood there watching us, head tilted slightly to one side. Emma whimpered, burying her face against me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt heavy, pressing against my chest. Finally, in a voice so soft I almost missed it, the child spoke. "Play with me." The words slithered into the air, wrapping around me, sinking into my bones. My throat locked, but somehow I managed to whisper back, "What do you want?" The smile widened, teeth catching the faint light. "Stay." Before I could react, it was gone. One blink and the space at the foot of the bed was empty. Only the faint scent of rot lingered, clinging to the sheets to my skin. Emma sobbed quietly, her small body trembling. I held her close, my own tears slipping silently down my face. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning I tried to tell my parents again, but they brushed it off. My mother insisted it was nightmares, stress. My father grew angrier, warning me to stop frightening Emma. But even as he scolded me, I saw his hand shake. So, when the first night of laughter and whispers finally gave way to silence, I thought perhaps the house had grown tired of toying with us. But the truth was that it was only waiting for us to become curious enough, desperate enough to dig deeper into its secrets. And that curiosity began with a single sheet of yellowed paper I found wedged behind a drawer in the old oak desk that sat unused in the study. Its edges curled like brittle leaves and its ink faded but still legible enough to make my heart pound. Because it wasn't a random page, it was an article, an old newspaper clipping dated decades earlier, telling of a boy who had once lived here. A boy whose name was Thomas, though everyone called him Tommy. A boy who had vanished from his home one stormy night and was never seen again. and the longer I read, the colder the room seemed to become, as though the very air leaned in to listen, to remind me that he had never truly left. I remember Emma coming in behind me, rubbing her sleepy eyes, asking what I was reading, and I hesitated because I didn't want to frighten her, but she snatched the paper from my hand before I could decide, and I watched her face change from curiosity to confusion and then to dread as she whispered, "That's him, isn't it? The boy in the attic." And though I tried to calm her, telling her it might just be coincidence, I couldn't ignore the way her voice trembled, because she had seen more of him than I had. His shadow, his presence, his reflection in the glass, and deep down we both knew it was no coincidence at all. That night I couldn't sleep, not with that article lying folded on my nightstand, whispering to me in silence, daring me to learn more, and so when the house fell into its heavy midnight quiet, I crept back into the study, lit only by the faint glow of the moon through the curtains, and began pulling open every drawer, every shelf, searching for more. And it was as if the house had been waiting for me to try, because in the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a false wooden panel, I found a bundle of belongings wrapped in an old quilt, items so dusty and forgotten that my fingers left prints on them. And when I unwrapped the cloth, the first thing I saw was a small stuffed bear, its button eyes mismatched, its fur worn thin by years of touch. And though it was silent and lifeless in my hand, I felt a chill creep down my spine, because I knew, without needing to be told, that it had once belonged to Tommy, the boy who now lingered in our attic. The bundle also contained more papers, some torn, some folded, some scrawled with childish handwriting, drawings of stick figures and houses, and scrawled beneath them were words that were shaky but desperate. "Don't forget me." Over and over again, those words appeared on different scraps of paper, sometimes alone, sometimes accompanied by crude sketches of a boy standing at a window or sitting on the floor with his bear. And I realized then that he hadn't just been locked away physically. He had been erased, wiped from memory, as if his existence had been deliberately hidden, and what I was holding now was his only protest, his attempt to leave proof of himself in a world that had moved on without him. Emma woke again and found me sitting there with the stuffed bear in my lap, my face pale, and when she saw it she froze, her little hands clenching at her sides, and she whispered, "He showed me that." And when I asked her what she meant, she said that in her dream, or maybe it hadn't been a dream, she had seen the boy clutching that very bear, its eye missing, its fur torn, and he had whispered to her the same thing I had read on those scraps, "Don't forget me." From that moment, Emma refused to go near the attic door, no matter how much I reassured her. And honestly, I couldn't blame her, because the more we uncovered, the more alive his presence became, as if each discovery breathed new strength into him, pulling him closer into our world. The following days were filled with tension, the air heavy with something we couldn't shake. And though my parents remained oblivious, complaining only about drafts and creaking floors, Emma and I shared looks that said we knew better. And one afternoon, while they were out shopping, I decided to push further, to see what else the house had buried. And I returned to the study, this time pulling at the back panel of the desk itself, where my fingers caught on another folded sheet wedged deep within the wood. And when I tugged it free, I found an even older document, this one handwritten, not printed, with ink that had bled into the paper over time. It was a letter, unsigned but clearly written by someone who had lived here, someone who had known Tommy, and as I read the shaking words, my heart sank, because it spoke of shame, of fear, of a boy who was not right, who was better kept away where no one could see him. And though the words didn't say it outright, I could read between the lines. I could feel the cruelty that had hidden behind them, the kind of cruelty that locks a child in an attic and pretends he never existed. I sat there for a long time with that letter, the stuffed bear staring up at me from the desk, and I felt an anger grow inside me, not just fear but outrage, because whoever had written those words had stolen a life, had condemned a child to loneliness and silence. And I knew then that what haunted us wasn't just a restless spirit, it was grief. It was rage. It was the desperate echo of a boy who had been betrayed by the very people meant to protect him. That night, when Emma and I were supposed to be asleep, we whispered under the covers, her small hands clutching mine as I told her about the letter, about the drawings, about the plea to not be forgotten. And instead of crying, she surprised me by saying, "Then we can't forget him, we can't let him fade again." And though I wanted to argue, to tell her we shouldn't get involved, I couldn't bring myself to disagree. because the thought of leaving him to his endless solitude felt like a cruelty of its own. But what neither of us understood yet was that remembering him came with a cost. Because the moment we gave him space in our thoughts, in our words, he began to grow stronger, and the house, which had always felt heavy with silence, now pulsed with his presence. Every creak and sigh echoing like a heartbeat, every shadow bending like it carried weight, until it felt as though Tommy himself was no longer trapped in the attic alone, but had spread through the walls, listening, watching, waiting for us to open the door again. The following day, the house seemed different. Though nothing had changed on the surface, the same peeling wallpaper in the hallway, the same groaning pipes that rattled in the walls, but beneath all of it there was a shift, a heaviness that clung to every breath, as though the air itself had thickened, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the boy, Tommy, was no longer just a shadow in the attic, but a presence that had begun to seep into every corner of the house. Emma stayed close to me, quieter than usual, and whenever we passed beneath the attic door she would flinch, tugging at my sleeve, urging me to hurry. I tried to distract her, to pretend that life could be normal, but normalcy was already slipping from us like water through cupped hands. It wasn't long before the house made sure we remembered that. That evening, as the sun sank and the house filled with long shadows, we sat in the living room with the television murmuring low, our parents absorbed in a program, and Emma coloring on the floor. Suddenly she stopped, her crayon frozen mid-stroke, her head turning slowly toward the ceiling. I followed her gaze, and though I heard nothing at first, a moment later it came. A faint shuffle like small feet moving across the attic floor, then the sound of fabric dragging, and then, clearer than anything, a soft knock 3 times, deliberate and measured. My parents glanced up, annoyed, muttering about raccoons or loose boards, but Emma's wide eyes found mine, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was, that it was him, trying to remind us he was there. That night I dreamed of the stuffed bear. It sat at the end of my bed, though I knew I'd left it in the study, its glassy, mismatched eyes staring at me, and behind it, in the shadows, I saw the outline of a boy, slight and frail, his features blurred but his eyes bright and unblinking, and as he leaned forward his lips moved, though no sound came. I woke drenched in sweat. The image burned into my mind, and when I looked to the corner of my room I swore for a moment the bear was there, though when I blinked, the space was empty. In the morning I told myself it had been a dream, but the unease never left. Days passed, and Emma and I began to piece together more fragments of Tommy's story, scouring the house whenever our parents weren't looking. We searched the basement, the cupboards, the closets, and it was behind a loose brick in the fireplace that Emma found another scrap, a page torn from a journal. The handwriting was the same childish scrawl, shaky but urgent, and the words were simple but haunting. "It's cold. I'm scared. Don't let them shut the door again." Emma read it aloud, her voice breaking on the last line, and then she pressed it against her chest like it was something fragile, whispering, "He was so lonely." I wanted to comfort her, but the truth was my own throat ached with the same grief, because every scrap we uncovered wasn't just a clue, it was a fragment of a life, a reminder of how long he had sat in silence, begging for someone, anyone, to hear him. We didn't tell our parents. How could we? They already dismissed the noises as pipes and drafts, and if we tried to show them the papers, they'd probably scold us for snooping, maybe even take them away. And the thought of losing those scraps, the only proof we had of. The final night began the way all terrifying nights do, quietly, without warning, slipping over the house like a heavy blanket, the kind that muffles sound and steals breath. And though everything looked the same on the surface, the flickering lamps, the ticking clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, I knew in my chest that something had changed, that the boy in the attic was done with whispers and shadows, that he was ready to step fully into our world, and he had chosen Emma as the price. It started with the bear. Emma had left it on her nightstand, tucked neatly beside her lamp, but when she woke with a jolt just after midnight, she found it sitting at the foot of her bed, upright, its button eyes staring at her. She screamed, loud enough to bring me rushing down the hall, and when I burst through her door she was curled against the headboard, trembling, pointing at the toy. My first instinct was to calm her, to tell her she must have moved it without realizing, but even as the words formed on my tongue, I knew they were lies, because the bear's fur, matted and worn, was damp, as though tiny fingers had clutched it with desperate strength, and the air in her room was icy, a cold that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. I grabbed the bear and shoved it into the closet, shutting the door tight, but Emma whispered, "He's coming." And though I told her she was safe, that I wouldn't let anything happen, I could feel it too. The weight pressing down on us. The awareness of unseen eyes watching, waiting. I stayed with her, sitting at the edge of her bed, and for a while the house was silent except for her uneven breathing. But then it began. The sound of footsteps above us, slow and deliberate, moving across the attic floor. We froze, staring at the ceiling as the steps grew louder, closer until they stopped directly above Emma's bed. The air was so cold I could see my breath, and then, faint but clear, came a child's giggle, playful yet wrong, the kind of sound that doesn't belong in the dead of night. Emma clutched my arm, burying her face against me, and I wanted to run to wake our parents, to flee the house altogether, but something held me there, something stronger than fear. It was the sense that this was only the beginning, that running would only make him chase harder. Suddenly, the attic door creaked open, though no one touched it, and the stairs groaned as if under the weight of small, unseen feet descending. I leapt up, positioning myself between Emma and the hallway, my heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst, and then I saw him. For the first time, he didn't vanish into shadows, didn't blur at the edges. He stood in the doorway. A boy no older than 7, his hair dark and messy, his clothes old-fashioned and torn, his bare feet pale against the wood, and in his arms he held the stuffed bear. He smiled, a wide, unsettling grin that showed too many teeth, and his eyes locked onto Emma with a hunger that twisted my stomach. "She'll play with me," he whispered, his voice thin but carrying, and though I wanted to shout to tell him no, the words stuck in my throat. Emma whimpered, clinging to my hand, and that seemed to anger him, his grin faltering, his eyes narrowing. "Don't forget me," he hissed louder this time, the words echoing off the walls, and as the lamp beside Emma's bed flickered and died, we were plunged into near darkness, the only light the pale moon filtering through the window, casting his shadow long across the floor. I forced myself to speak, my voice shaking but firm. "We remember you, Tommy, we know who you are. But you can't have her." For a moment his expression softened, as though hearing his name brought back a trace of the boy he once was. But then his face twisted, his small body trembling, and with a sudden shriek that rattled the windows he lunged forward, the bear dropping from his arms as his hands reached out. Not for me, but for Emma. I reacted without thinking, throwing myself between them, and though he looked like a child, his touch was ice, burning cold, and the force of him knocked me backward into the dresser. Emma screamed, the sound raw and piercing, and for a split second I saw him standing at her bedside, his hand reaching for hers, his face inches from hers, his mouth moving in a whisper I couldn't hear. Somehow I found the strength to rise, grabbing the bear from the floor, and I shouted his name again. Louder this time. "Tommy!" His head snapped toward me, his expression wild, feral, but when he saw the bear clutched in my hand, he froze. The room fell silent except for Emma's sobs. Slowly, carefully, I held the bear out toward him. "This is yours, isn't it?" I said, my voice hoarse. "We found it. We found you. You're not forgotten anymore." His eyes flickered, the rage in them dimming for just a heartbeat, and in that fragile moment I thought maybe, just maybe, I had reached him. But then the air thickened again. The shadows darkened and his smile returned, sharper than before. "Not enough," he whispered, stepping closer, his gaze sliding back to Emma. "She stays with me. Forever." The moment those words left his mouth, the room seemed to contract, as if the walls themselves leaned inward, the ceiling lowering, the air pressing against our lungs so heavily it was impossible to draw a full breath. Emma clutched at me, burying her face in my arm, and I could feel her trembling, every shiver like a spark of terror passing into me. And I knew then that if I faltered even for a second, Tommy would take her, drag her into the shadows where I could never reach. He stepped forward, each bare footfall soundless on the carpet. His eyes locked on her as though I weren't even there, and with every step, the temperature in the room dropped until my breath came out in ragged clouds. I raised the bear higher, my hand shaking, my voice breaking as I shouted, "You can't have her, Tommy. She's not yours." For an instant he hesitated, his gaze flickering to the toy, and the boy inside the monster peeked through, lonely, broken, aching, but the darkness pulled him back, and his smile stretched wide and unnatural as he whispered, "She'll never leave me like they did." With that he lunged, and this time his body didn't pass through me like a shadow. It slammed into me with the weight of something solid, icy fingers clawing at my arms as he tried to shove me aside. Pain shot through me, sharp and searing, but I held on, grabbing his wrist, forcing the bear against his chest. "This is yours!" I shouted, desperate, my throat raw. "You're not forgotten. We see you, Tommy." He froze, his small frame rigid, his wide eyes locked onto the bear now pressed to him. For a breathless moment the room stilled, even the shadows pausing as though the house itself was waiting. His lips trembled, and I thought I saw tears glitter in his eyes. "Mine," he whispered, his voice cracking, and he reached out with both hands to cradle the bear, clutching it so tightly his knuckles turned white. Relief surged through me, my knees nearly giving way until his head lifted again and the smile returned, twisted and wrong. "She can hold it for me," he said softly, turning his gaze back to Emma, "when I take her with me." Emma whimpered, shrinking back against the headboard, and rage burned through my fear, hot and fierce. "No," I roared, stepping between them again, my body a shield. "You suffered, I know, but you won't do this to her." The air quaked with his scream, shrill and inhuman, rattling the glass in the windows until they cracked. The light bulb above us shattered, plunging us into darkness, and in the flicker of moonlight through the window I saw him change, his face blurring, his small form elongating, becoming less boy and more shadow, his outline shuddering like smoke. He rushed at me, slamming me back into the wall, the impact knocking the air from my lungs, his icy grip tightening on my throat. My vision swam, my knees buckling, and for the first time I felt the hopelessness he must have lived with. Trapped, powerless, forgotten. But then through the haze of choking darkness I heard Emma's voice, small but clear, trembling but brave. "Tommy," she whispered, crawling to the edge of the bed, her eyes wide with tears. "You don't have to be alone anymore. We remember you. We won't forget you. Please don't take me." The shadows shivered, faltering, his grip on my throat loosening as he turned toward her. For a moment he looked like a boy again, fragile, his lips trembling as though her words had pierced the fog of anger that bound him. "Remember me?" he asked, his voice cracking, uncertain, like a child afraid of the answer. Emma nodded, her tiny hands clutching the quilt. "Always," she whispered. "I promise." The room held its breath. I stumbled forward, clutching the dresser for balance, my chest heaving as I watched him stand there, torn between fury and longing, between the monster he had become and the child he once was. Slowly his hands loosened on the bear, his fingers stroking its worn fur as though drawing comfort from its presence. For a heartbeat I thought it was over, that his rage had dissolved, that he could finally rest. But then the shadows surged again, stronger, darker, curling around him like smoke, pulling his features into something monstrous, and his voice, when it came, was no longer that of a boy, but a chorus of whispers, layered and jagged. "Not enough. Never enough." He lunged at Emma,